Welcome to Crossroads. The tariffs, well, they might not be legal. A federal appeals court, they just shut down most of President Donald Trump's tariffs. It's going to go to the Supreme Court now. They could decide whether these tariffs stay or go. Also, in other news, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he's announcing an investigation into one of the big questions we have. Are psychiatric drugs contributing in school shootings? Well, we'll be discussing these topics and a lot more today. So don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. It really does help us a lot. And you get updates on the next show. Now, look, first off, on whether Donald Trump's tariffs stay or go. Well, Yahoo Finance said this. A federal appeals court struck down most of Trump's Congress averting global import tariffs Friday in a dispute that's predicted to head to U.S. Supreme Court. Yahoo News is basically inserting their interpretation that Trump is avoiding Congress and putting tariffs in place and so on. The big question is, well, is that the role of the president or the role of Congress? If you go back historically in the United States, tariffs, well, it was one of the only powers that the executive branch of the federal government actually had. But they note this, the courts seem to disagree. The 7-4 ruling, it says, issued by 11 judges for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit in Washington, D.C., allows the tariffs to remain in place while the administration decides on an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, meaning they're gone but temporarily can stay unless the Supreme Court decides otherwise. It notes the decision upholds a ruling handed down in May by the U.S. Court of International Trade, CIT, saying that the president lacked legal authority to order, by way of executive order, a series of global tariffs imposed on U.S. trading partners. It notes further at the center of the dispute is the scope of a national security-based law enacted in 1977. And this is important because, again, as I was saying, according to the Constitution, according to the original ideas of the United States, this is a power the President of the United States does have. But they're saying a 1977 law would change this. That's the IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. It says the law authorized the president to, quote, regulate international commerce after declaring a national emergency. The big question is, well, to what extent, right? Now, should be noted, the decision by the judges, it was down partisan lines. Republicans basically said, Trump, keep your tariffs. This is the power of the president. Democrats, for the most part, said, no, Trump, you do not have these powers. And while judges are supposed to not be partisan, look, like everybody else they are. Let's just be honest with ourselves. This is very much a partisan issue. And on that point, when it goes to the Supreme Court, the big question is, well, will the ruling stay the same? Because if it does, the conservative-leaning justices will probably stand by Trump. And he's counting on that. Trump said this on Truth Social. He said, all tariffs are still in effect. Again, it's going to the Supreme Court, but still in effect. He said today a highly partisan appeals court incorrectly, Trump said that our tariffs should be removed, but they know the United States of America will win in the end. He said if these tariffs ever went away, it would be a total disaster for the country. It would make us financially weak, and we have to be strong. He says the USA will no longer tolerate enormous trade deficits and unfair tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers imposed by other countries, friend or foe, that undermine our manufacturers, farmers, and everyone else. If allowed to stand, this decision would literally destroy the United States of America. He says at the start of this Labor Day weekend, we should all remember that tariffs are the best tool to help our workers and support companies that produce great made-in-America products. He said for many years, tariffs were allowed to be used against us by our uncaring and unwise politicians. And he said that now, with the help of the United States Supreme Court, we will use them to the benefit of our nation and make America rich, strong, and powerful again. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, on that point, when this goes to the Supreme Court, and remember, the key point is this. Yes, the appeals court says Trump doesn't have this power. All the tariffs stay in effect until it goes to appeal with the Supreme Court yet again, and we'll have to see what the Supreme Court says. It does seem likely that the decision will get overturned. It does seem likely that it will be determined that Trump will keep these powers, at least. We'll see to what extent, because the Supreme Court might not say absolutely. This is according also to the White House trade advisor, Peter Navarro, who spoke on Fox News Sunday Morning Futures. Watch this.
This was weaponized partisan injustice at its worst. Politicians in black robes. It was a bad decision, but the good news is the dissent was very, very strong. I think it provides a very clear roadmap to how the Supreme Court can certainly rule in our favor. The questions are like, is there a national emergency? Of course, people are dying of fentanyl, and the trade deficit is like absolutely devastating to this country. To tariffs, this is like a semantic issue. Are tariffs qualifying as the regulation of imports? Of course they are. There's plenty of law on that. One of the red herrings they threw out for the majority was that somehow, because they argued the tariffs were permanent, hey, memo to the court, we never said they were permanent. You can't find Lutnick, Besson, Greer, or myself, or the president saying that. If China and the drug cartels from Mexico and Canada stop killing Americans tomorrow, tariffs go away. Ditto if the trade deficit went to zero. So the bottom line, Jackie, a very good dissent, provides a roadmap for the Supreme Court. We feel very optimistic. If we lose the case, President Trump is right. It will be the end of the United States.
And this is...
Now, here's some more context on that ruling on the court from the Court of Appeals. Epoch Times said the ruling said that Trump had overstepped his presidential authority when he invoked the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act to apply proportional tariffs against U.S. trade partners around the world based on trade imbalances they had with the United States. And the president also invited countries to renegotiate their trade agreements with the United States to reduce or eliminate these planned tariffs. It's further in the court ruling will not take effect until October 14th. Allowing the administration to appeal the decision to the Supreme Court, which they're doing. Now, look, we've seen before a Supreme Court decision does not necessarily mean the district judges are not going to try to block it. So even if the Supreme Court says, Trump, you have full power to make tariffs, it doesn't mean that Trump's going to tariff another country and like a random judge in some, random district is going to put a nationwide injunction blocking Trump from doing it. Even though the Supreme Court decided that district judges don't have that authority, because they keep doing it, right? It is interesting to see what's happening in this country. Even when the Supreme Court tells these district judges they cannot do something, they keep doing it. So again, we'll see what happens. There's nothing really in place to stop them. There's no real law to go after justices or judges who do that. So they keep doing it, frankly. On the point of Trump's tariffs, though, this is going to be the big thing. The reality for the United States, we trade at a deficit with most countries on Earth. I think Trump has noted that only 2 countries on the entire planet, there's only 2 countries that we do not trade with a deficit with. And he noted he's not going to name them because he's concerned that if he does name them, they're going to be like, why are we losing? They're going to start trading to our loss. America, in every trade deal we have, we lose. And part of that is not just because of the trade deals themselves. Part of it is because a lot of the barriers put in place. While the United States is criticized for having trade barriers and what Trump is doing, the reality is most countries do to the United States what Trump is now being criticized for doing to them. India, for example, they've noted that Trump is being predatory. They're going to China now, talking about better trade deals. They're actually coming back to the table now and saying they'll remove every trade barrier for Trump if he agrees to drop some of these tariffs. On their side, they say that India is protecting its own interests. They put trade barriers in place. They basically block most U.S. goods from being sold in India. They have massive trade barriers in place to protect their markets. They trade very heavily with us at our loss. We buy a lot from them. And so Trump is noting, look, you guys think it's okay when you do it, but then you criticize us when we do it. Where's the logic in this? Canada, for example, has placed very heavy tariffs on American goods. They block a lot of American goods. Most of Western Europe has very heavy tariffs and trade barriers against the United States. And the important thing is this: it's not just tariffs. It's not just tariffs. It's policies, for example, that fine American companies like Western Europe, putting just massive fines on American tech companies, rolling fines based on their laws, which are seen as unofficial tariffs. It's trade blockades on a lot of American goods. It's 100% tariffs on our cars. It's things that allow them to trade with us, but block our companies from even doing business in their countries, or prevent us from buying property in their countries or otherwise, like China, for example. It has become natural to an extent that most countries believe it's acceptable and totally right when they do it to the United States. But when the United States does equal trade barriers back, they call it tyrannical, they call us evil for it, and they protest against it. I would raise the question, is Germany protesting against their tariffs against the United States? Was Japan protesting against its tariffs against the United States? Were Canadians taking to the street and saying, how dare Canada block trade with the United States? How dare we have an unequal trade deal? How dare we trade at America's loss? No. It was India protesting against their trade barriers to America's goods, saying, India, why are we not having a fully free market? Why do we not allow America's goods into our markets? The simple answer is no. None of them have cared ever about the imbalances they trade with at America's loss. But when America does it, suddenly we're the bad guys. I think that's the Trump stance on this. On that point, too, Trump is arguing that, look, you want to have Congress vote on every single trade deal? Look at the trade deals they've already negotiated. We lose on almost all of it. Members of Congress turn around and invest in the companies that are making out like bandits on these trade deals at America's loss. They're getting rich. America's getting poor. The average American, they're not benefiting from this. And again, you know, it's a big club and you're not in it. This is kind of the way it's being framed. Now, on the point of the president, the other side is people are arguing President Trump is basically ruling by decree, that Trump is personally interjecting into international, the international economy to an extent, that basically at his whim, through the use of executive orders, he's changing trade deals, renegotiating trade deals, and Congress is arguing, look, one of the roles of Congress is to, negotiate the budget. And they're arguing that trade deals should be within the budget. Also, many are arguing that international agreements, typically you need a 2/3 vote from Congress. Look, they haven't been doing that because they just call it other things. If you create an international treaty, according to the Constitution, you need a 2/3 vote from Congress. Some would argue that a trade deal represents an international treaty. Trump and his side is arguing, look, you want to play at that game? What about the Paris Climate Accord? What about the Global Compact for Migration? You've been creating international treaties, but calling them other things. If you call is a treaty by any other name still a treaty? If you call it a pact or an agreement or something like that, and it's technically a treaty by every other definition, you still need a 2/3 vote by Congress. The reality is, for the United States, for a very long time, that has not been the case. That has not been the case. Although, again, you could argue, according to the Constitution, it should be. It's just not being followed. We'll see where the Supreme Court rules on this. We'll see where they go. Many would argue, again, according to the original interpretation of the U.S. Constitution, the President of the United States, the executive branch of the U.S. government, in the original interpretation, this was one of the sole purposes of the federal government. One of the sole reasons that America went from being a confederacy after the American Revolution and changed that from a confederacy of states into a republic was because individual states were being ripped off by every country in Europe. European countries were absolutely ripping off individual states because we didn't have a unified we didn't have a unified strength that would allow us to diplomatically deal with bad trade deals. The reason, one of the key reasons for federalization, for the creation of the federal government, not just a random seat, a confederacy of states, a federalization, one of the main reasons for that was to give the executive branch and the federal government the ability to negotiate trade deals. We will see where the Supreme Court stands on this. Personally, I believe that if they go by a more constitutional stance, and remember, based on the current justices in place, they do lean more in that direction, I believe that the tariffs will stand. But we will see. We'll find out very soon. Now, look, also speaking of tariffs, it's possible that Trump's very tough tariffs on India are pushing the country closer to China and away from the United States. India's prime minister is holding meetings with CCP leader Xi Jinping, and they're trying to rebuild relationships between the two countries. Trump shot back on this. This is what he wrote on Truth Social. Trump said, "What few people understand is that we do very little business with India, but they do tremendous amount of business with us." In other words, they sell us massive amount of goods, their biggest client, quote unquote, but we sell them very little. Until now, a totally one-sided relationship. And it has been for many decades. He says this, "The reason is that India has charged us until now such high tariffs, the most of any country, that our businesses are unable to sell into India. It has been a totally one-sided disaster. Also, India buys most of its oil and military products from Russia and very little from the U.S. They have now offered to cut their tariffs to nothing, but it's getting late." He said they should have done so years ago. Just some simple facts for people to ponder. Now, India is very unhappy about this. On their side, they're saying, well, look, if America doesn't need us, we'll go to China, and we'll see how that works, because they don't necessarily get along. India, in reality, they've been playing both sides for a very long time. They again rely on the United States as their basically biggest selling partner, not their biggest buying partner. We have a very one-sided business relationship with this. India has already been part of the CCP's alternative system for a very long time. Again, they've been playing both sides, mostly with no benefit to the United States. They're one of the main BRICS members, which is the CCP's kind of alternative world order. BRICS, again, being Brazil, Russia, India, China, and, of course, other countries. But the technicality was also, they're very close to Russia. India's relationship with BRICS is a little complicated because while the CCP is kind of the main force on it, India is very close with Russia, going back to even the Cold War. They were kind of playing both sides for a very long time. They're not that close with the Chinese Communist Party. They have territorial disputes. The CCP regards India as its main competitor on the cheap manufacturing market. When it comes to things like H-1B visas, when it comes to things like, sending workers and students to the United States or to Western Europe, when it comes to countries looking for alternatives for cheap manufacturing, India is the greatest competitor to the CCP. They do not get along. The challenge that India is going to have with China is, well, what they want. Because what do they want? They want somebody to buy their goods, right? They want to sell their goods. China's not looking to buy, they're also looking to sell. India buys gas and weapons from Russia at very low prices. After the war with Ukraine and the sanctions put on Russia, India increased its purchases of Russian oil by astronomical levels. What they do is they buy Russian oil and they basically resell Russian oil, bypassing U.S. sanctions on behalf of Russia. They buy it very cheap from Russia, they hike up the prices, and then they sell Russian oil on the international market, meaning they basically they've been undermining U.S. sanctions on Russia. Others have argued a lot of other countries do that. China does it. Japan does it. Most countries, a lot of countries do it. The other thing is who's buying from India knowing it comes from Russia. It's kind of a big game that everybody knows everybody's playing and they pretend they're not playing it. Everybody's kind of getting around it. Even Western Europe, they buy a lot of energy from Russia despite all the talk about war with Russia and, hey, we're big enemies. They basically are propping up the Russian economy. It's a big game and nobody wants to talk about it. They're all playing a game of charades, where they on one side say, hey, look, war is at our doorstep, but under the table they're all trading and, buying stuff from them still. It's a weird kind of schizophrenic global system we have. Same thing with a lot of countries in China. Politically and militarily, enemies fighting with each other. On the business side, they're still trading. It's like an abusive relationship where you still go to bed with each other every night, but you hate each other during the day. That's the reality of these relationships. There's a lot of big talk, but the reality is behind closed doors, they're all still trading. Now, on the point of India, they're going to be facing a lot of problems with China if they do try to move closer to them. One of them is territorial disputes. The other one being what India represents. Again, cheap manufacturing, foreign workers, and again, they want to sell, they don't want to buy. Both China and India have very heavy barriers with countries going there and working. They have very heavy barriers for foreigners doing business in their countries. And if they try to do business and both want to sell and neither want to buy, it's not going to work. I think Trump understands this. He's saying, maybe you'll keep it going for a year. It's not going to last. On the other side, too, India is going to be counting on maybe a peace deal with Russia. If that peace deal goes into place, it's not going to matter if they buy all the Russian oil in all of Russia and resell it. Nobody's going to care because it's not going to be controversial. If they remove all their trade barriers with the United States, which they're talking about doing right now, it works for Trump, frankly. I do think that, in my personal interpretation, that's the more likely outcome. I think Trump understands this. India, if they remove all their trade barriers, and it doesn't matter if they're buying Russian oil, it doesn't matter. It's going to be back on the table, and again, they're going to be probably one of the bigger trade partners with the United States. That is the reality of it. And it does seem to be heading in that direction if we can get a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. That's a big if. Now, on the other side, too, unless the Chinese Communist Party wants to buy from India or other countries, the reality with the CCP is it often has very one-sided relationships. Many countries lose with China, very few benefit with China. They might make some kind of short-term deal. It's very hard to have a lasting relationship, which is one of the reasons why most of the CCP's closest partners are countries that are basically ostracized from the rest of the world. Unless you're basically cut off from the entire world, you're not going to be dependent on the CCP. The countries that do have heavy trade deals with China, and there's a lot of them, they do it with everybody. They're not closed off. The one-sided relationships, they're saying, we're only going to trade with you. It's basically Russia, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela now to an extent, and a handful of others. India's not going to want to be on that side because they don't have to be, frankly. So personally, I see this as being a short-term deal. When it comes to India, I see this turning out very similar to what we saw with Mexico and Canada when it comes to the tariffs, because remember what was happening? Both Mexico and Canada freaked out, pushed back, threatened the United States, saying, how dare you do this? Canada actually more so. Remember, Carney came in Canada basically saying he was going to be tough on the United States. As soon as he got in, first thing he did was move to make a deal with Trump, right? He campaigned on being tough on Trump. First thing he did was made a deal with Trump. Both were talking about leaning closer to China. Fine, America doesn't want me. I'm walking to China. What has happened now? Both of them are now tariffing China. Mexico just put really heavy tariffs on China. They actually did. Canada, despite the conversations about them moving closer to China, it was the opposite. Look, both of them have folded to the United States in the tariff war. Both of them have now put in place actually very heavy tariffs against the CCP, even more strongly than expected. And I can tell you, in my interpretation, India is going to go the same route because they're following the same course. They're on the same course right now, and I think Trump understands that. We'll see what happens, right? Now, look, in other news, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced investigations into the big thing a lot of us have been wondering for a very long time. Are psychiatric drugs making people freak out, go crazy, and go on killing sprees? Something's causing it. What is it, right? Is it a moral loss in this country? Is it chemically induced? Are people losing their minds? And are some of the drugs they are taking causing that? The big question, are SSRIs, psychiatric drugs, a contributing factor in school shootings? I'll be talking more about this after a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back to Crossroads, a show by the Epoch Times, one of America's largest independent newspapers. Support us and independent journalism by hitting that like button, leave a comment below, and thank you so much for watching. Now, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is now looking into one of the big questions. He has announced investigations into whether psychiatric drugs are a contributing factor in school shootings.
I certainly consider mass shootings a health crisis, and we are doing for the first time real studies to find out what the etiology of that is. And we're looking for the first time at psychiatric drugs. You know, these kind of mass shooting, people have had guns in this country forever. When I was a kid, we had shooting clubs at our school. People, kids, my classmates, other people, would bring a .22 rifle with their guns to school and park it in the parking lot. Nobody was shooting. So there's never been a time in America, in the history of humanity, and people walked into a crowd, into a church or a movie theater or a school or a crowd of strangers and just started randomly shooting. It's happening in our country. It's not happening around the world. And there are many other countries that have comparable levels of guns that we have in this country. We had comparable levels in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and people weren't doing that. Something changed, and it dramatically changed human behavior. And one of the culprits we need to examine is whether the fact that we are the most over-medicated nation in the world, and that a lot of those are psychiatric drugs that have black box warnings on them that warn of suicidal and homicidal ideation. So we are doing those studies right now for the first time, and we will have an answer.
Now, a couple points on this. Look, the reality is when it comes to health issues and mental health issues, normal people don't pick up a gun and go shoot up a school or a church. If somebody does that, there's something not right in their heads. The big question is, well, is it the craziness that made them do this? Or is it the things they took to try to cure the craziness that made them do this? That is the big question. Mentally healthy people do not go on killing rampages, right? Sane people just don't do that. There has to be something seriously, mentally wrong with the person to do anything like this. And the big question that's going to be answered is this: is it because these people are just messed up in the heads, and then that's why they maybe sought mental health help, in the first place, and that's why they're on the drugs? Is that why they went and did this, and maybe the drugs weren't enough? Or did the medications make it worse? That's going to be one of the big questions that they're hoping to answer. It is true, and this is the big kind of way that the school shooting narrative gets mixed up. When a lot of media talk about mass shootings in America, they fumble the numbers. Mass shootings includes like a murder-suicide. A couple gets in an argument, one person shoots their spouse and turns the gun on themselves. A lot of the shooting deaths in America, it includes suicides. The reality is, if you were to take out Chicago and a couple other places in the U.S., America would have one of the lowest homicide rates in the entire world. We have a few cities that make us look very bad when it comes to homicide rates. Most of America is actually pretty low homicide rate. The other factor is this: when it comes to guns and knives and everything else, if you look at the rate of murders that have happened internationally, it changed relatively by the same factor despite gun bans in countries like Australia and Canada, based on the way that murders changed from the 90s up until now, even in the U.S. In some countries, rather than using a gun, they use trucks, like we saw in Nice, like we saw in France, for example, right? In some countries, people go on stabbing rampages like you have in the United Kingdom. It does seem that there is something else causing a lot of this. The question is, well, what is that thing? In the United States, of course, one of the big narratives has been, well, are the SSRIs making people go crazy? Are they causing homicidal tendencies? It is a fact that most major school shootings, the common factor with many of the school shooters is they were on SSRIs. Now, you could argue they were on SSRIs because they had mental problems, right? So was it the mental problem or the drug that caused them to go out and do that stuff? That's a big question, right? What is true, though, that cannot be denied, something has dramatically changed in human behavior. Something in recent history changed, and people are doing things they used to not do. Look, even when I was a kid, before the Columbine shootings, guns were not that controversial, at least not where I was at. You could grab your BB gun, go behind the school and shoot targets and stuff. Nobody cared. Before the Columbine school shooting, guns, even on school grounds, were not that controversial, at least not where I was. It used to be that you would even have gun clubs at schools. You would have target shooting classes at schools. America had a gun culture, and we didn't have a problem of mass shootings. What changed? Is it the tool that changed? No, the tools have always been there. The guns are always there. What changed? RFK Jr. is raising an important question. They're saying, well, we want to find out what changed. Have people become just insane? Have people lost touch with basic morality? Is it the medications? It is true, one thing. Some medications, some SSRIs, they list as known side effects, quote, suicidal thoughts, and quote, homicidal ideation. They say this publicly. They say it on the commercials sometimes. Have any of you watched commercials for medications and they're saying, side effects may include homicidal ideation? If it's causing people to have these kinds of thoughts and it lowers their impulse control, you might have homicides as a side effect. Some SSRIs also list symptoms like, quote, hostility, aggression, quote, violence, and, quote, abnormal behavior. And if you have a combination of a drug causing hostility, violence, abnormal behavior, and suicidal or homicidal ideation, you might have people who become crazy and homicidal as a side effect. I'm going on a limb here, but I would say that it says that in the actual commercials for some of these things. The big question, again, is it causing people to do this, or were they crazy to begin with? That's the million-dollar question. We might get answers on it. Now, look, speaking of medications also, President Donald Trump is also now ordering investigations into the effects of the COVID shots. Did they achieve what they were meant to achieve, or did they not? Trump said this on Truth Social. He said it is very important that the drug companies justify the success of their various COVID drugs. This is important. Trump stands by his stance. He's saying justify the success. Trump has stood by that Operation Warp Speed was beneficial to the world, saved, and quote, millions of lives, he says, but a lot of people don't believe that. And Trump says this: many people think they are a miracle that saved millions of lives. Others disagree. With CDC being ripped apart over this question, I want the answer, and I want it now. I have been shown information from Pfizer and others that is extraordinary, but they never seem to show those results to the public. Why not? They go off to the next hunt and let everyone rip themselves apart, including Bobby Kennedy Jr. and the CDC. Trump is criticizing RFK here to an extent about, RFK Jr. has been very much against the COVID shots. And Trump is saying, trying to figure out the success or failure of the drug companies' COVID work. He said, they show me great numbers and results, but they don't seem to be showing them to many others. I want them to show them now to CDC and the public and clear up this mess one way or the other. I hope Operation Warp Speed was as brilliant as many say it was. If not, we all want to know about it and why. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President DJT, Donald J. Trump. Now look, it seems that Trump really, I know he's getting criticized. I know there's two sides to this. And if you look at what the media is saying, a lot of them are saying Trump is investigating, the harm of the COVID shots. Trump is telling the drug companies to show the evidence they've shown to him, saying that Operation Warp Speed was a success. That's what he's actually saying. Trump has stood by his stance that Operation Warp Speed, which rapidly released the COVID shots, he's saying it saved millions of lives. Trump has stood by his stance that, remember, he's the guy who did it in the first place, right? He was the one behind Operation Warp Speed. That the rapid creation of vaccines, the rapid launch of these, the laws that removed some of the barriers on testing and so on, allowed the public to have a vaccine very quickly in what was regarded as a pandemic that could have killed a lot of people. Trump is standing by that he believes he saved a lot of people's lives by doing that. What he's telling the companies to do right now is not, in my interpretation, Trump is not saying, hey, Pfizer, do some new studies. Trump is saying that, he says Pfizer by name. Trump is saying that Pfizer has already shown him evidence that says that it saved a lot of people's lives. He's arguing that they're not showing the public the evidence that they've shown him. And Trump is telling these companies now, show the public the evidence you've shown me. Trump seems to believe, again, these saved a lot of people's lives, and he seems to believe also that by showing the public evidence that the COVID shots actually did save lives, that it will clear up a lot of the distrust that a lot of the public has developed, both of the pharmaceutical industry and of the CDC. I think he believes that, and I think all of us could agree to an extent, that COVID caused a lot of distrust. No matter which side you're on, it caused a lot of distrust between the public and the medical institutions, right? I think everybody has seen this to some extent. Whether you agree with the distrust or not, I think everybody has seen this. Trump is suggesting that we can't have that. We need to clear up this distrust. And maybe the best cure to that distrust is a public disclosure of evidence, which he's now ordered them to do. Now also, speaking of Trump, and speaking of rumors, and speaking of distrust, there are rumors going around that Trump is dead. They're still ongoing. It turns out Donald Trump is not dead. I know there are some conspiracy theories going around saying that he's a body double. I'm not even joking. Look, when Biden was president, you had a lot of these same theories as well. Let's be honest with ourselves. There were a lot of these theories as well. The other side is now doing it to Trump. It's a lot, and even a lot of the big media are saying it. A lot of online influencers are saying it. They're doing like, past and present photo comparisons. I don't think Trump is dead, and Trump also responded to these rumors. This is what he said according to Breitbart. It said President Donald Trump, trolled leftists who were questioned whether he was and spread baseless rumors on social media of his death over the weekend, informing them that he has, quote, never felt better. Trump said, quote, never felt better in my life. Trump wrote in a post on Truth Social. He said, quote, also, D.C. is a crime-free zone. And Trump was responding to another post. This is on X. Democrat Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker responded to a post of Trump on Truth Social where he threatened to send in federal support if crime in Chicago is not addressed. In this post, Pritzker asked Donald Trump for, quote, proof of life. Trump, if you're alive, tell us. He said, quote, why don't you send everyone proof of life first, meaning before you deploy the Guard to Chicago. Pritzker wrote, adding that Chicago does not want him there. And they say, quote, this is from Harry Sisson, a Gen Z Democrat influencer, quote, Donald Trump hasn't been seen publicly in 3 days. And added, quote, the White House press pool didn't see him once today. He has no public events scheduled for Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. Where is Donald Trump? Maybe it's because it was a holiday weekend and Trump took a little vacation. It turns out that Trump was, in fact, seen between then and now. Trump does not seem to be beyond this world. He's still with us, to the dismay of some. But it does seem to be the case. This is yet another rumor. On that front, too, a lot of this is on the piggyback of rumors going on of Trump's health problems. People have been seeing bruises on his hand. They tried covering it up with like makeup. To be honest, they didn't do a very good job. It looked kind of weird. But Trump's hand was bruised. On the White House side, they're saying that his hand was bruised from shaking too many hands. That may sound crazy as somebody who goes to events quite often and shakes probably hundreds of people's hands. It's true. This may sound crazy. Some people shake your hand very hard. Not joking. Some people have a vice grip, and you might think it's not that big of a deal when you shake 10, 20, 30 people's hands, but when you shake like 100 people's hands every day for like 3 days, it actually does kind of hurt your hand after a while. They're arguing that for Trump, that was the reason for it. Do you believe that or not? I don't know. But on that point, too, it's been kind of the big conspiracy theory right now, not even just on like the far left, like, underbelly type side. And look, conservatives are doing it too when Biden was, although look, it turns out he wasn't really fully there. Conservatives are doing it too when Biden was president, right? Turns out Biden was just on vacation a lot. But on Trump's side, it's even the big media. A lot of the mainstream media, they're full on conspiracy mode, talking about like Trump and whether he's alive or not. So on that point, again, Trump is alive, and that seems to be the fact. Anyways, that said, let's jump into some questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. First off, Ashley from California, you're saying if EOs, executive orders, can all be stopped by judges, what exactly does the president do other than sign or veto laws brought by Congress? And that's the question Trump has been raising. Look, if you can have any district judge in the United States, even judges born in other countries, you have judges who are born in like Tobago and stuff like that, and like random countries all over the world. You have foreign judges in the United States who are blocking the president of the United States with a single ruling. How is it that every district judge in the United States has more power than the president of the United States? The president of the United States has to be born in America. You can't have a foreign-born, you cannot have a foreign-born president. Although maybe we've seen that before, right? Hint, hint, wink, wink, according to Trump at least. I don't know. But of course, Trump is also raising this point. He's like, why even bother having a president if the president has no authority? Why don't you just elect a bunch of judges to rule the country? I don't know. On that point, the Supreme Court has determined that judges do not have the ability to create nationwide injunctions. The problem in the United States is that law is also very strongly tied to language. And so if you create a nationwide injunction and use a different name for it, some believe it bypasses the Supreme Court determination. Or you can find like little exceptions to technicalities and so on. Well, you said I couldn't do this, but you didn't say I couldn't do this very slightly thing that I very mildly renamed. And they do it. And the argument is they can keep doing that until it goes through the entire appeals process and yet again to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court does another little whack-a-mole, get your head back down type move. And I think they believe they can delay Trump long enough to where basically he'll have nothing done by the time of the next election. In my take, that's what they're doing. We will see. On that point, I would also say this was the announced strategy of the kind of anti-Trump lobby. Remember, even before Trump was elected president, even on the campaign trail, 2023, 2024, you had groups getting together, including activist groups, including both sides of the aisle in Congress, including legal organizations like these legal activist organizations, law firms, and so on. Political action committees coming together in quote-unquote wargaming for the Trump presidency. They planned all this out. And a lot of it is just delay tactics. They're trying to delay Trump and make sure he can't do anything before his 4 years are up. And frankly, they're kind of doing a good job at it. They are challenging basically everything he does. And most of what he does is repeatedly getting put on hold as it goes through the court process. And even when it goes to the Supreme Court, they just keep putting it on hold again. There's a very big battle going on in this country, and a lot of it's taking place through the courts. And it is an interesting case as well that, as Ashton from California is noting, it seems that like random district judges in some ways have more power than the president. It is interesting to see. Denise B., you're saying other countries need to do unto America as you would have America do unto you. I like that. You know, Denise, that could be a campaign slogan. That I think if a president were to campaign on that, saying my new slogan is "Make the world great again," not just "Make America great again," and the global announcement is going to be "Do unto America as you would have America do unto you," or else we will do this unto you, you might just win an election. Because it seems to be the case that it actually seems that a lot of America's problems are not problems within our own borders. A lot of our problems are international. You also add, if you tariff America, America should tariff you. If you won't see your land to America, America won't sell our land to you, etc. You know, it's interesting as well because that goes, at least in my interpretation, that goes back to kind of what I was talking about earlier. The reason we have a federal government, the reason for federalization. If you go back to the early discussions on, the creation of the Constitution and why we moved away from being a confederacy as a country. When you had the anti-federalist papers and the federalist papers and so on and so forth, and the creation of the Constitution and the creation of the federal government as a constitutional republic, the big argument was international relations. The main focus of the federal government was not so much for domestic policy. The domestic policy until the Civil War was mostly on the states. The states, individual states, for the most part handled domestic law, handled domestic policy and so on. The federal government had very little authority over that. The main role of the federal government was security and security, diplomacy, and international relations, and trade. So, for example, securing the borders, one of the main authorities of the federal government, and again, one of the big controversies with the open border policies, one of the main roles of the federal government is international defense, right? The military and, fighting wars. The other big thing is diplomacy, and tied in with diplomacy is trade. That's why we have a federal government. It would be interesting to see if and again, that changed after the Civil War because Abraham Lincoln basically overturned a lot of the state rights because, like, he's saying, look, guys, we're the land of the free. You can't have slaves. Come on, you gotta draw the line somewhere. You know what I mean? You gotta draw some line. And over the course of time, mostly throughout the 1900s, we've seen a very large expansion of federalism over the states. And some think it's a good thing, some think it's a bad thing. I'd say it's a little bit of both. But regardless of where you stand on that, it is interesting that a lot of U.S. policy internationally does not serve direct American interest. I know the other side of the argument, which is this: the post-World War II international order has been the Pax Americana. America is the world leader. And part of being a world leader is you need to sacrifice a bit of your own interest to maintain the order as you see it. The argument on the other side is, well, yeah, but the problem is a lot of countries are still living under communist dictators. A lot of the world is socialist. A lot of the world just takes advantage of the United States, turns around, backstabs us, makes international military and different types of disagreements with our enemies, and they want to have all the deals still the same. The other side is a lot of the trade deals we made were made at times when other countries were in dire economic straits, and they're no longer in dire economic straits. I'm looking at you, Germany and Japan. And Japan has been very friendly with turning that around, by the way. But a lot of the policies we have were post-World War II policies when Western Europe was basically rebuilding, when Japan was still rebuilding, post-Korean War policies where South Korea had to be basically entirely rebuilt, Cold War policies where a lot of the developing world, Africa and Latin America, were dealing with terrorist groups and, Maoist, insurrectionist groups and so on. And part of American diplomacy was, look, we will trade at a loss with you in order to prevent you from falling to communism. We made a lot of those deals. A lot of them played both sides of it. They adopted communist and socialist policies, made agreements with their enemies, and still traded our loss, basically backstabbing us while getting all the benefits. And should we keep doing that, right? Like even our best trading partners like Canada and Mexico, we trade at heavy losses with. Even Western Europe, which very close to American policy, we trade at very heavy losses with. Where do we draw the line? It would be interesting to see a political campaign based around the idea of kind of repairing America's international standing. And would that mean restoring more of a traditional view of domestic policy? Hey, look, if California wants to have super left-wing policies, so be it. State rights, let them do it. If Texas wants to have super right-wing policies, so be it. Let them do it. State rights. If other states want to have middle-of-the-road policies, if Florida wants to be the Florida man of the country, let them do it. State rights. To what extent do you allow that? And I know the other argument is, well, state rights have basically allowed states to have race-based criminal enforcement, race-based open border policies, undermining the United States, bad policies on drugs and crime and education and so on. To what extent do you deem them doing things that are harmful to the American people? Republicans have an idea that harmful to American people represents that. Democrats have the idea that harmful to the American people is policies that create unequal outcomes and allow people to be discriminated against and so on? Where do you make the determination? I don't know. We'll see. I would actually add one more thing to it. You know, I do a lot of outside interviews. I was on another radio show this morning. I do about 10 outside interviews a week. I do a lot of outside interviews. And one thing I was talking about today on another show was basically the problems we have with extreme polarization. And I know this may sound funny because, let's be honest, we're a very polarized country. It used to be the case that Republicans and Democrats were not that different. Some people thought that was a great thing. Some people thought it was a terrible thing. Was it that we got along more closely, or was it, you know, the two wings of the same bird of prey? I don't know. But that had its benefits. When you have a government that flip-flops from Republican to Democrat every 4 to 8 years, sometimes a little longer, sometimes a little shorter, it makes a big difference when it comes to international diplomacy. Because if you're trying to make an international deal and your international stance changes radically every 8 years, not many countries are going to see you as stable. This is a problem we have, that we deal with a lot of dictatorships. We deal with a lot of one-party systems, and we deal with a lot of countries that are basically one-party systems and pretend not to be. You know, a lot of other countries, also even democratic countries, the difference between their right and left are not that different. A lot of, look, Australia, their conservatives and their Democrat equivalents, and I know they go by different names, they're not that different. The polarization in some countries is not that extreme. And what that means is that party to party, election by election, the country doesn't change that much. America changes very heavily, whether a Democrat is in power or a Republican is in power. We change drastically. And that makes it very hard for us to make international deals because we're seen as basically politically schizophrenic, right? We're like a politically schizophrenic entity when it comes to international relations, even internal policy, and it because we flip-flop from very, very extreme sides. Now, I would argue, in my personal take, and where I see things, I would argue that I view it as an international shift, and I believe that the very extreme shift represents a very extreme change in the trajectory of the entire world. I actually believe that we're seeing an international power shift, and it's happening from the grassroots. If you look at the protests happening in Europe, if you look at the protests not really happening in some countries because they frankly crushed them. If you look at what people are demanding on a grassroots level in Canada, and look, a lot of Latin America right now has seen a rejection of socialism, where nobody's really talking about it. Most of Latin America is rejecting socialism and doing it more effectively than even the United States. A lot of Asia is having mass protests. There are mass protests in Indonesia that almost nobody's talking about right now. China is having huge internal instability against the CCP. Western Europe, look at the UK right now, the protests spreading. And what you're also having now is what they call the rise of populism. New forms of government that represent, I wouldn't say a Trumpian type political interpretation, but something more in line with what Trump represents. You're actually seeing an international change in power dynamics that represents a very anti-socialist, anti-progressive, I guess you could call it, shift. You're seeing a global rejection of what socialism was. And the reality is, whether right or left, socialism defined the last 100 years. I'd say even longer than that. Socialism defined the world post-industrial revolution. Since at least the mid-1800s, socialism has defined part of the international debate. That is dying. It's actually dying right now. The world is changing. The problem you see right now, though, is that many international powers are trying to put that down. They're suppressing it, whether it's through the suppression of free speech and the censorship systems, whether it's through brutality and tyrannical approaches, whether it's through just, let's say, the old guard of the state-controlled news industries that are trying to cover it up. But I don't think it's actually fixing it. On the other side of that, part of the reason for the international censorship bodies and part of the reason for trying to put down this kind of the rise of populism, as some are defining it, right? The rising populism is because what do governments really want? They want predictability. What do businesses want? Businesses want predictability. What do investors want? Predictability. What do NGOs and other groups want? Predictability. All the powers that be want predictability. And when they see a movement and they don't know the trajectory of that movement or an international shift in power, they might try to suppress it because it's unpredictable. They don't know what it's going to become. And especially when that unpredictable power is looking to make them the enemy, you're going to have a power struggle. And so I think that's what we've been watching for the past 10 years. Many groups regard Donald Trump as the cause of this, which is why Trump has been kind of the, the global public enemy number one, so to speak. He's regarded as the guy who caused this. Is he the guy who caused it? I don't believe so. I believe it was a brewing movement that predated Trump. I think Trump was a symptom of a change, not the result of the change, or not the cause of the change. Others say that the cause for this was uncensored, unvetted information on the internet, the ability of independent content makers, the ability of people to go on international platforms, social media, and say whatever they want and start debates and controversy. The ability of international groups and organizations and other powers that be to go and manufacture international talking points and narratives, and the cause of a change in the international ideology based on the change on the information presented. Was that manipulated? Was that grassroots? Was it intentional? I don't know. But some blame that for the political shifts that followed the ideological shifts. And some view censorship as being the cure to that. The sanitization of the international debate, right? This is why in the UK, for example, a lot of the powers that be are saying no more free speech, basically. Have BBC represent the standard of what news is. Have BBC represent the standard of what the narrative is. Look, I like BBC to an extent. I think they do some decent coverage. But a lot of people are saying, well, you guys also cover up a lot of stories. You don't get everything right. And you also don't tell the full picture. And so on the Trump side, because Trump is in power right now, they're even telling the UK, you don't have the right to suppress free speech in the United States. And again, I think this does tie into the global power shift we're now watching. Something is changing. The bigger question in place right now is, will it continue? Will it continue beyond Donald Trump? Trump has another 3 years in office. We don't know who the next Republican candidate is going to be. We don't know if they're going to carry the banner of Trump or represent something different. It's possible that if the RNC goes back in, they might go back to like a George Bush-style Republican Party. That is totally possible. The other reality we've seen is that in other countries, for the most part, they have suppressed populism. In most of Europe, where populist parties did get into power, they were not able to properly gather power to themselves to create a real party. They weren't able to do it. In other countries, like in Brazil, or in South Korea, the populist type candidate was investigated, prosecuted, and is facing imprisonment now. They crushed the opposition. Will that rebound? Will that change? Is the wave merely a wave, or is it something that represents a permanent change? We will see. But again, there has been an international shakeup. If you ask me, I would say we can look back to Rome in terms of how this could go, because like many American men, I think about Rome every single day. And I know I'm going long on this right now, but let me make one point. What we're watching is almost identical to the Roman Civil War. What we're watching right now in the United States is almost identical to the end of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman emperors. Actually, around about 100 BC, I believe it was, but I believe about 100 years before Jesus. And so what happened was Julius Caesar was represented as the populist party representative. In fact, the whole narrative of populism it ties into this. That's where the narrative comes from. The guy who was representing the populist movement, Julius Caesar, was very popular among the general population. He was representing a threat to the Roman Senate and the Roman Republic, as it was. He was representing a new form of government, really a return to the a return of the emperor, right? He wanted to become emperor, not even king. At the time, also, Rome was an internationalist system. Rome was a globalist power. It wasn't just like single culture, single tribe, or single race. And I know in modern interpretation we say, well, it was European. European was not one country. Try to tell an ancient Roman that the Celts and the Germans and the Vandals were Romans because you're all the same race. They would have laughed and spat in your face. They were not the same race. We define race differently than it used to be defined. Even tribes were regarded as different races. They were a globalist system in the interpretation of the time. And so the politics were not that different from now. Many of the debates they had were not that different from now. Many of the controversies and even the cultural shifts were not that different from now. Even a lot of the more controversial things we deal with in terms of sexual choice were not that different from now. Julius Caesar did represent a very Trumpian type politics. And I know that some people might not like the comparison, but he kind of did. What happened, right? Well, he won, right? Fought his battle with Magnus and put them all down. It was said that during the last battle of the Roman Civil War, it was as if the entire world rose against Julius Caesar. If you go and read Pharsalia by Lucan, one of my favorite books, I love it. It's on par with the Odyssey and almost totally forgotten. It is so good. Pharsalia by Lucan, such a good book. There's a dedicated part of the book talking about all the warring tribes, all the armies of the Roman Republic, all the mercenary groups, all the people of the empire. It has expanded. The people from the plains of Africa, like the wild warriors from the north, all these tribal groups who rose together as the body of what Roman expansionism represented. All the armies, all the savage tribes, every emblem that represented Roman power rose up and joined alongside the Roman Senate to fight and put down Julius Caesar. And it's said that it was as if the entire world rose up against Caesar, so they could be destroyed in a single blow. The narrative was, it was a battle of what is more popular. People fighting for the Senate or people fighting for the identity of what Rome represented. What is a more unifying force, right? And it turned out that Caesar won. Now the issue with Caesar, his entire movement also failed. He failed. He failed because they killed him. And you could argue that the Senate retook power and then established a tyranny, a very tyrannical, destructive, totalitarian government, which brought about just religious persecution, some of the worst surveillance policies the world, I don't know if it ever seen, but pretty bad ones. You had the reign of Tiberius. When it comes to censorship and policies of like thought control, we think it's a modern thing. Tiberius had the same things. He had the same things. Tiberius represented a thought crime, thought control type policy. You had horrible tyrants come into play after the destruction of both the Roman Republic and of the populist movement of Julius Caesar. Meaning, there's also the possibility you can get a third option. You might not get populism, you might not keep your republic, you might get something worse. And I do think that as we go into these times of extreme division, I do hope we take some lessons from Rome and take lessons from the past, because we might think we're so different. We're not. We're not that different. We're really not. My fear is that we won't keep a republic and we won't keep populism as we believe it is. We might get a third option. And I hope that does not happen. I know some Christians out there would also say, well, that's what the Bible says, right? I know many people would say that. That's what the Bible says is going to happen. But I hope not. Maybe communism represented that time of tyranny, and maybe the end of that is coming. I also believe that's very possibly the case, because the reality is we have lived under an international communist order that represented every element of tyranny and every element of what a horrible government can represent. Maybe that's coming to an end. I hope so. But I would say, as a last thing on this, I hope we can take lessons from the past. We don't need to repeat the mistakes. Part of the reason why tradition is valuable, part of the reason why culture can help us, is because it's based on the experiences of people who went through the same things we're dealing with. We're not smarter than our grandfathers or our great-grandfathers. I'd say a lot of us are not even as smart as them. We like to think that technological progress has made us greater than the men and women of the past, that somehow we're wiser than they were. I don't think that's the case. I think they dealt with the same conflicts we dealt with. I think we deal with the same challenges they dealt with. I think we deal with a lot of the same political problems and same threats and same concerns and same worries that they dealt with. And they learned lessons from them. They found what happens when you do this and when you do that. They showed us the results of human action. And I believe that by looking at the experiences of the past, we can avoid the worst outcomes. I hope as a nation, and I hope as a world, we can take lessons from the experiences of the past and not repeat them, not repeat the bad mistakes. And we can take a positive lesson and have a good future. I really do believe that. That said, may communism come to an end. May the world become brighter. And I believe that's what's happening. I personally do believe that. That said, on that very long tangent and very long topic, thank you all so much for being here. Join me again tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Let me know in the chat, what do you think about this? I don't know. I will see you again tomorrow. And as always, please take care of yourselves. Stay informed and stay free. Thank you.